The cranberry sauce was still dripping from my mother's spoon when she stood up at our Thanksgiving table, pointed directly at me, and announced to 23 relatives that I needed to pack my bags and stop being a financial leech on this family. The dining room fell silent except for the ticking of my grandmother's antique clock. My cousin Derek's fork froze halfway to his mouth. My younger sister Emma couldn't hide her satisfied smirk. My father Harold stared at his mashed potatoes like they held the secrets of the universe. I felt my face burn with humiliation as every pair of eyes in that room turned to stare at me, their expressions ranging from pity to judgment to uncomfortable curiosity. Without saying a word, I pushed back my chair, stood up on trembling legs, and walked upstairs to pack. My childhood bedroom felt smaller than I remembered as I pulled my old duffel bag from the closet. The Superman posters from high school still hung on the walls, faded reminders of simpler times when I believed in heroes and happy endings. I folded my clothes methodically, each piece a small act of defiance against the chaos downstairs. The sound of family conversation resumed below, punctuated by nervous laughter and the clinking of silverware against china. 8 months ago, everything had been different. I had moved back into this very room after selling my startup company to a major tech corporation for $3.2 million. The acquisition had been the culmination of 5 years of 18-hour days, ramen dinners, and sleeping on office couches. I could have bought a mansion in any neighborhood I wanted, but I chose to come home while my downtown loft underwent renovation. My mother Patricia had been proud, then calling neighbors to brag about her successful entrepreneur son and posting carefully curated photos on social media. What she never mentioned to anyone was that since March, I had been covering the household mortgage payment of $3,800 every month, plus utilities that ran $450, groceries that cost around $600, and my father's medical expenses that totaled $1,200 monthly. Nearly $6,000 every month handed over without question or complaint, because I thought that was what family did for each other. I was zipping up my laptop bag when someone knocked softly on my door. Derek peeked his head, and his usually cheerful face creased with concern and embarrassment. At 31, my cousin had always been more like an older brother, the kind of guy who remembered birthdays and checked in during tough times. "Rudy, can I come in for a minute?" he asked, using the childhood nickname only family members were allowed to use. I nodded, continuing to pack while he closed the door behind him and sat heavily on my old desk chair. He ran his hands through his brown hair, a nervous habit I remembered from when we were kids, getting in trouble for breaking windows with baseball. "Look, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." Derek began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your mom has been telling everyone for months that you're unemployed and depressed. She said you moved back home because you couldn't make it on your own and that you've been draining the family savings account to pay for therapy and medication." The shirt I was folding slipped from my hands. I stared at Derek, trying to process what he had just said. "What do you mean telling everyone?" "The whole family, Rudy. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even some of the neighbors. She painted this picture of you as this lost young man who couldn't function in the real world." Derek's voice cracked slightly. "We all came here today thinking we were staging some kind of intervention to help you get back on your feet. That's why nobody defended you downstairs. We thought we were helping." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I sank onto my bed, my mind reeling. While I had been quietly supporting the entire household, my mother had been systematically destroying my reputation with the people I cared about most. Every family gathering I had missed due to work commitments, every phone call I had cut short because of business meetings, every moment of distance I had created to focus on my career had been twisted into evidence of my supposed failure. "Inari wa ma." But why would she lie about something like that? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Derek shifted uncomfortably. "I think she resented your success, man. You know how your mom always needs to be the center of attention, the one everyone comes to for advice and support. When you started making real money, it made her feel small. So she found a way to make you the family problem instead of the family success story. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this revelation settling between us like a heavy blanket. Downstairs, I could hear my father's voice, trying to smooth over the tension with jokes that fell flat. My sister Emma was probably basking in the attention, finally getting to be the good child for once. The door opened again, and my father appeared in the doorway. Harold looked older than his 58 years. His shoulders stooped with exhaustion and stress. His graying hair was disheveled, and his eyes held the defeated expression of a man who had long ago stopped fighting battles he knew he could not win. "Son, maybe you could just come downstairs and apologize," he said quietly, unable to meet my eyes. "You know how your mother gets when she's upset. If you just say you're sorry and promise to try harder, we can put this whole thing behind us." I looked at my father, this man who had taught me to ride a bike and throw a curveball, who had worked double shifts at the manufacturing plant to pay for my college education. The man who now stood in my doorway, asking me to apologize for being humiliated in front of my entire family based on lies my own mother had told. "Dad, do you know where the mortgage money comes from every month?" I asked quietly. Harold's face went pale. He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. Finally, he just shook his head and walked away, leaving Derek and me alone with the terrible truth that my own parents knew exactly who was supporting whom, but preferred the comfortable fiction to the complicated reality. I finished packing in silence, my trust in my family shattered like glass on concrete. Every family photo on my dresser now felt like evidence of my own naivety. How could I have been so blind to what was happening right under my nose? The stairs creaked under my feet as I carried my bags down to the living room where dessert was being served. The smell of pumpkin pie and coffee filled the air, creating a false sense of warmth and normalcy. My mother, Patricia, stood near the kitchen island, cutting generous slices of pie while making pointed comments about finally seeing some responsibility, and maybe this will teach certain people about consequences. She looked perfectly put together as always, her auburn hair styled in soft waves, her burgundy sweater coordinating with her carefully applied lipstick. At 55, Patricia maintained the appearance of a woman who had everything under control. Only I knew about the chaos hidden beneath that polished exterior. I set my bags by the front door and walked back into the dining room where most of the family had gathered around the dessert spread. Conversations quieted as I entered, and I could feel the mixture of pity and judgment radiating from my relatives. They all believed they were witnessing a necessary intervention, a tough love moment that would somehow set me straight. Before I leave, I need to share something important with everyone here. I announced, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. My Uncle Robert, a retired accountant with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, looked up from his pie with interest. Robert had always been the family's voice of reason, the one who helped people navigate financial decisions and tax problems. If anyone would understand what I was about to reveal, it would be him. "I know my mother has told all of you that I'm unemployed and financially dependent on the family." I continued, pulling out my phone. "I want to show you the actual financial records from the past 8 months." I opened my banking app and began displaying the screenshots I had prepared. Monthly transfers to my parents' mortgage company for $3,800. Utility payments ranging from $400 to $500 depending on the season. Grocery receipts totaling anywhere from $500 to $700 monthly. Medical bills for my father's diabetes medication and cardiology appointments. "This is $38,000 I've contributed to this household since March," I said, handing my phone to Robert. "Every major expense has been covered by money I earned from selling my software company." Robert examined the bank statements carefully, his accountant's eye, catching details others might miss. He scrolled through months of transactions, his expression growing more serious with each screen. The room had gone completely silent except for the soft jazz music playing from my mother's Bluetooth speaker. "These are legitimate bank transfers," Robert announced to the room. "The dates, amounts, and recipients all match what Rudolph is claiming. According to these records, he has been covering the vast majority of household expenses for this family." My cousin Derek's wife, Sarah, a nurse practitioner with short blonde hair and kind eyes, shook her head in disbelief. "Patricia, is this true? Has Rudolph been supporting you financially?" My mother's face had gone from carefully controlled confidence to something approaching panic. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently searching for words that would somehow explain away the evidence. "He forced that money on us," Patricia finally said, her voice shrill. "He insisted on paying for everything as some kind of power play. We never asked for his help." That was when I decided to drop the bigger bombshell. What she's not telling you is that despite receiving these payments every month, my parents are currently 3 months behind on their mortgage, I said quietly. "I discovered this last week when the bank called me directly. They listed me as an emergency contact because of my regular payment history." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Robert asked to see the mortgage statements, and I showed him the screenshots of past due notices that had been piling up in my parents' mail. Harold sank into his chair, his face a mask of shame and defeat. "Where has the money been going if not to the mortgage?" Robert asked, his accountant instincts kicking into high gear. Harold finally spoke up, his voice barely audible. "Patricia has been using it for other things. Shopping spa treatments, things she said we deserved after years of struggling. She told me the mortgage was being handled through automatic payments. My sister Emma, who had been smugly enjoying my public humiliation just minutes earlier, now stared at our mother with growing horror. At 25, Emma worked as a marketing coordinator for a local nonprofit, and while we had never been particularly close, she had always been the family favorite. Seeing her realize that our mother had been lying to everyone seemed to physically pain her. "Mom, is that true?" Emma asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Have you been spending Rudolph's mortgage payments on yourself?" Patricia's carefully constructed facade finally began to crack. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," she said, her voice rising. "Taking care of this family, managing everyone's needs, making sure everything runs smoothly. I deserve to have something nice for myself occasionally." Uncle Robert was now calculating numbers on his phone, his expression growing more grave by the minute. "If Patricia has been diverting mortgage payments for 3 months, and Rudolph has been paying other household expenses, we're looking at a significant financial deception. This is potentially thousands of dollars that has been misappropriated." $23,000? Harold said quietly, pulling out a folder of credit card statements he had apparently been hiding. "She has $23,000 in credit card debt that I just found out about last week." The revelation hit the family like a bomb. Emma burst into tears, finally understanding the magnitude of what had been happening. Derek put his arm around his wife Sarah, both of them staring at my mother with expressions of disbelief and disappointment. My grandmother Dorothy's voice cut through the chaos from the kitchen doorway. "What in the name of all that is holy is going on in here?" Dorothy walked into the dining room with the measured pace of someone who had seen 8 decades of family drama and was prepared for whatever she might find. At 79, my grandmother maintained the sharp intelligence and no-nonsense demeanor that had carried her through raising 5 children as a single mother after my grandfather died in Vietnam. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her blue eyes missed nothing. "Grandmother, I'm so glad you're here," I said, genuinely relieved to see the one family member I had always been able to count on for honesty and fairness. Dorothy had raised me during summer months when my parents worked, teaching me everything from how to balance a checkbook to how to change a tire. Derek called me from the other family gathering and said there was trouble. Dorothy said, setting down her purse and accepting the chair Robert offered her. "Now somebody explain to me why my grandson is standing here with packed bags while the rest of you look like you've seen ghosts. I took a deep breath and explained everything from the beginning. The false stories about my unemployment, the 8 months of financial support I had been providing, the mortgage payments that had been diverted to credit card debt and personal spending. Dorothy listened without interruption, her expression growing more stern with each detail. When I finished, Patricia immediately launched into damage control. Mother, you have to understand that Rudolph has been trying to control us with his money. He acts like because he's successful, he can dictate how we live our lives. I was just trying to maintain some independence. Dorothy fixed Patricia with a stare that could have frozen water. Independence. By lying to your entire family and stealing your son's money, by humiliating him in front of everyone who loves him. I wasn't stealing anything, Patricia protested. That money was given freely. If he didn't want me to spend it how I saw fit, he shouldn't have given it to me. That was when I realized I had to reveal the deepest secret of all, the one truth that would change everything and expose just how far my mother's selfishness and deception had gone. There's something else everyone needs to know. I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. 4 months ago, this house went into foreclosure. Mom and Dad lost it to the bank because they couldn't make the payments. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's crying stopped abruptly. Robert's mouth fell open. Harold looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. When the bank scheduled the auction, I bought the property for $340,000 to prevent my parents from becoming homeless. I continued. The deed is in my name. I legally own this house. I've been letting them live here rent-free while covering all the expenses, planning to transfer the ownership back to them once they got their finances stabilized. Dorothy gasped, her hand flying to her chest. You bought your own family home at auction. I nodded, pulling out my phone to show the deed transfer documents. I've invested nearly $380,000 total in saving and supporting this family over the past 4 months. The house purchase, the ongoing expenses, everything. The family members who had been judging me an hour earlier now stared in complete shock. Patricia had just told her son to leave a house that he owned where she lived only because of his generosity and financial intervention. Patricia Ann Morrison. Dorothy said, using my mother's full maiden name in the tone that had struck fear into generations of misbehaving grandchildren. Are you telling me that you let your son buy back your own home to save you from homelessness, and then you publicly humiliated him and told him to leave? Uncle Robert was frantically calculating on his phone again. Rudolph, if you bought the house for $340,000 and have been covering approximately $6,000 in monthly expenses for 8 months, plus the mortgage payments that were diverted, you've invested nearly $400,000 in your family's welfare. Emma jumped up from her chair and threw her arms around me, sobbing apologies. Rudy, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I thought Mom was telling the truth about you needing help. I feel so stupid and horrible. Harold finally looked up from his mashed potatoes, his eyes red with shame. Son, I don't know what to say. I've been so afraid of confronting your mother about the spending that I just let it happen. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know how to stop it. Sarah, Derek's wife, who worked in mental health, spoke up gently. Patricia, what you've described sounds like it might involve some compulsive behaviors around spending and control. Have you considered that you might benefit from talking to someone professionally? Don't you dare try to diagnose me. Patricia snapped, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. The reality of her situation was becoming impossible to deny. She had just learned that her son owned the house she lived in, had been supporting her financially for months, and had saved her from homelessness, all while she painted him as a failure to their entire family. Dorothy stood up slowly, her arthritis making movement difficult, but her resolve crystal clear. Patricia, I raised you better than this. What you've done to Rudolph is inexcusable. You owe him and this entire family an apology. But instead of apologizing, Patricia's expression hardened into something I had never seen before, something calculating and desperate that made my blood run cold. If he bought our house, then he should sign it back over to us immediately, she said, her voice taking on a threatening tone. After all, it was our house first. The temperature in the dining room seemed to drop 10 degrees as Patricia's words hung in the air. She had just demanded that I sign over property worth nearly $500,000 property that I had purchased to save her from homelessness, as if I owed it to her simply because she had lived there before. Patricia, you can't be serious, Robert said, his accountant's practical mind clearly struggling to process such an unreasonable demand. Rudolph legally purchased that property with his own money. You have no claim to it. But my mother was beyond reason now. The careful facade she had maintained for years was cracking apart, revealing something ugly underneath. She strode toward the kitchen with purposeful steps, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like a countdown timer. I am completely serious, Patricia called over her shoulder. That house belonged to our family for 15 years. Just because we hit a rough patch doesn't mean Rudolph gets to steal it from us. Emma wiped her eyes and looked at our mother with growing alarm. Mom, he didn't steal anything. He saved you from losing everything. He manipulated the situation to his advantage. Patricia shot back from the kitchen. He probably knew about the foreclosure before we did and planned this whole thing to control us. Harold tried weakly to intervene. Patricia, please calm down. Let's all just sit down and talk this through rationally. And don't tell me to calm down, Patricia screamed, her voice echoing through the house. I've been calm for months while watching my son lord his success over us and make us feel like charity cases in our own home. Dorothy shook her head sadly. This is exactly how you acted as a teenager when you didn't get your way. I had hoped you'd outgrown this behavior. Sarah, with her background in mental health, tried a different approach. Patricia, I can see that you're feeling overwhelmed and threatened. These kinds of major changes and revelations can be very difficult to process. Maybe we could all take a step back and consider some professional family counseling to help work through this situation. Patricia returned from the kitchen carrying a manila folder, which she threw down on the dining room table with enough force to rattle the remaining dishes. I don't need counseling. I need my son to stop playing games and sign these papers. I picked up the folder and examined its contents. Inside were several legal documents that appeared to have been hastily prepared by some kind of online legal service. The top document was a quitclaim deed that would transfer ownership of my house directly to Patricia with no compensation or conditions. You had these papers drawn up? I asked, genuinely stunned. When? Last week, when I realized what you were trying to pull? Patricia said, crossing her arms defiantly. I knew you would try to use that house to control us, so I got ahead of it. Sign those papers right now or get out of my house forever. The irony of her demanding I leave her house, that I actually owned, was not lost on anyone in the room. Derek stood up slowly, his face flushed with anger I had rarely seen from my usually mild-mannered cousin. Aunt Patricia, are you hearing yourself right now? Derek asked. You're threatening to disown your son if he doesn't give you a house that he bought with his own money to save you from homelessness. Do you realize how that sounds? It sounds like I'm standing up for my family's rights, Patricia replied, but her voice was starting to shake. Rudolph thinks he can buy us and then throw it in our faces whenever he wants something. What has he ever thrown in your face? Emma asked, her voice small but gaining strength. What has he ever asked for in return for all the money he's given us? Patricia turned on Emma with surprising viciousness. Stay out of this, Emma. You're too young to understand the complexities of adult relationships and financial obligations. That was when my phone buzzed with an incoming call. I glanced at the screen and saw it was Jennifer Martinez, the real estate agent who had helped me purchase the house and who had been working with me to find investment properties. The timing seemed almost cosmic. Excuse me for just a moment, I said, stepping toward the back door. I need to take this call. As I walked outside into the crisp November air, I could hear Patricia's voice rising again, something about convenient interruptions and dramatic exits. But Jennifer's call was about to give me an idea that would change everything. "Rudolph, I hope I'm not interrupting your holiday," Jennifer said, her professional warmth coming through clearly. "I wanted to let you know that I have a cash buyer interested in that property we discussed last week. Are you still thinking about selling?" An idea began forming in my mind as I watched my family through the dining room window. Patricia was gesturing wildly, while Dorothy sat with her arms crossed, clearly disgusted by her daughter's behavior. Harold looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. "Actually, Jennifer, I might have a different property. I want to discuss selling," I said. "Are you available to meet with me first thing Monday morning?" "Of course. Which property are you thinking about?" "The house on Maple Street, the one I bought at auction." Through the window, I watched Patricia throw her hands up in frustration and point toward the back door where I was standing. Whatever she was saying was making Emma cry again and causing Robert to shake his head in apparent disgust. "That's a beautiful property in a great neighborhood," Jennifer said. "With the current market, you could probably get $485,000, maybe even $500 if we price it right. That would be a substantial profit on your investment. I think I'd like to move forward with listing it." I said, my decision crystallizing as I watched my mother continue her tirade. "How quickly could we get it on the market?" "If you're serious, I could have the paperwork ready by Monday afternoon and photos taken by Tuesday. We could be live on the MLS by Wednesday." I ended the call and stood outside for another minute, gathering my thoughts and preparing for what I was about to do. The family I could see through the window bore no resemblance to the loving, supportive people I had thought I was helping. Patricia's true nature was fully exposed now, and there was no going back from this moment. When I walked back inside, Patricia immediately pounced. "Was that your lawyer? Are you calling someone to help you figure out how to keep our house from us?" Instead of answering her question directly, I walked calmly to the dining room table and picked up the quitclaim deed she wanted me to sign. I examined it carefully while the entire room watched in tense silence. "You know what, Patricia Maffer," I said finally, "you're absolutely right about one thing. This situation has become completely unsustainable." I set the quitclaim deed back down on the table and looked around the room at the faces of my family members. Some showed curiosity, others concern, and Patricia displayed barely contained triumph, apparently believing she had finally backed me into a corner where I would have to give her what she wanted. "I just spoke with my real estate agent," I announced calmly. "I'm listing the house for sale first thing Monday morning." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Patricia's face went white, then red, then white again. Harold dropped his coffee cup, sending ceramic shards and brown liquid across the hardwood floor. Emma gasped audibly. Even Dorothy looked startled by this unexpected development. "You can't sell our house," Patricia sputtered, apparently forgetting her own words from just minutes earlier about the house belonging to her family. "Actually, I can," I replied, pulling out my phone to show the deed transfer documents again. According to the state of Illinois and the Cook County Recorder's Office, I am the sole legal owner of this property. I purchased it legally at a foreclosure auction with my own money. I have every right to sell it. Robert Ever, the practical accountant, was already calculating. "Rudolph, what's the current market value on a property like this?" "Jennifer estimates we can get $485,000, possibly more," I said. "Which means I'll make a substantial profit on my investment minus the 8 months of expenses I've covered." The mathematical reality hit Harold like a physical blow. "But we have nowhere else to go," he said weakly. "We don't have the money for first month's rent and a security deposit on an apartment." "You should have thought about that before publicly humiliating me based on lies," I replied, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. "I offered you the security of home ownership without any cost or conditions. Instead, I've been painted as a failure and a leech while secretly supporting everyone." Patricia's voice rose to near hysteria. You can't just throw your own parents out on the street. What will people say? What will the neighbors think? They'll probably think exactly what you told them to think, I said. That I'm an irresponsible failure who couldn't make it on his own. I'm sure they'll be very sympathetic to your situation. Uncle Robert pulled me aside, lowering his voice. Rudolph, are you really serious about this? Because once you list that house, there's no taking it back. Your parents will have about 30 days to find alternative housing. I looked at Robert, this man who had always been like a second father to me, who had taught me about integrity and financial responsibility. Uncle Robert, would you continue to financially support people who were actively working to destroy your reputation and demanding that you give them even more? Robert considered this for a long moment. No, he said finally. No, I don't think I would. Dorothy approached Patricia with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who had reached the end of her patience. Patricia, your son just offered you a way to stay in this house. All you had to do was apologize for the lies you've been telling and show some gratitude for everything he's done. Instead, you doubled down and demanded that he give you the entire house for free. It should have been our house in the first place, Patricia insisted, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. The reality of potentially losing her home was beginning to sink in. Emma wiped her eyes and looked at me with a mixture of admiration and fear. Rudy, is there any way we could work this out? Maybe if Mom apologizes and promises to get help with her spending. I felt a flicker of the old affection for my little sister. But the damage had been done too thoroughly for simple apologies to fix. Emma, the trust is broken. I can't continue to invest my money and energy in people who are actively working against me. What if we paid you rent? Harold suggested desperately. We could start paying market rate rent and gradually work toward buying it back from you. With what money, Dad? I asked gently. You're both unemployed and have $23,000 in credit card debt. Where would you get money for rent? The question hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the truth. Without my financial support, my parents had no income sufficient to maintain their lifestyle or housing. Sarah tried once more to introduce some reason into the conversation. Maybe this would be a good time to consider some temporary housing assistance programs, while everyone works on rebuilding trust and communication. But Patricia was beyond rational discussion now. This is blackmail, she declared. Rudolph is using his money to force us to grovel and beg. He's enjoying watching us suffer. I'm not enjoying any of this, I said truthfully. This is probably the most painful day of my life, but I won't continue to be lied about and taken advantage of. That was when I decided to offer one final alternative, partly because Dorothy was looking at me with an expression that suggested she thought I might be going too far, and partly because some small part of me still hoped my family could choose a different path. I'll make you one offer, I said, looking directly at Patricia. You can stay in the house if you publicly apologize to every single family member here for the lies you've told about me. You'll also need to enter financial counseling and agree to complete transparency about all household finances going forward. Patricia's face cycled through a range of emotions: relief, anger, indignation, and finally, stubborn pride. I have nothing to apologize for, she said finally. Everything I did was to protect this family from your attempts to control us. Then I guess we have nothing more to discuss, I said, walking toward my bags by the front door. Several family members began gathering their coats and purses, clearly uncomfortable with staying any longer. The holiday celebration that had started with such promise had devolved into something none of them wanted to witness further. Derek approached me one final time before I left. Rudy, I want you to know that whatever happens, you have my support. What you've done for your parents was generous and loving, and how they've repaid that generosity is shameful. As I picked up my bags and headed for the door, I could hear Patricia behind me, frantically trying to convince the remaining family members that I was being unreasonable and cruel. But her voice was growing more desperate and shrill, and I could tell she was losing whatever sympathy she might have had. The last thing I heard as I closed the front door was Dorothy's voice cutting through Patricia's protests with surgical precision. "You have made your bed, Patricia Ann. Now you get to lie in it." I'd barely reached my car when I heard footsteps on the driveway behind me. Harold was jogging toward me, his face pale, and his breathing labored from the exertion. At 58, and with his diabetes running, was not something he did often or easily. "Son, please wait," he called, reaching the car just as I was putting my bags in the trunk. "I need to talk to you, just give me 5 minutes." I looked at my father, this man who had raised me to believe in honesty and hard work, who had sacrificed so much to give me opportunities he had never had. Despite everything that had happened, I could not bring myself to drive away without hearing what he had to say. "5 minutes?" I agreed, closing the trunk and leaning against my car. Harold glanced back toward the house, where we could see Patricia gesticulating wildly through the dining room window, apparently still trying to convince the remaining family members that she was the victim in this situation. "Let's talk in the garage," Harold suggested. "What I have to tell you is not for everyone to hear." We walked to the detached garage where Harold kept his woodworking tools and where I had spent countless childhood hours learning to build birdhouses and repair broken furniture. The familiar smell of sawdust and motor oil brought back memories of simpler times when my biggest worry was whether I would make the baseball team. Harold closed the garage door behind us and immediately broke down sobbing. This strong man who had worked in manufacturing for 30 years, who had never shown weakness in front of his children, collapsed onto his workbench and cried like his heart was breaking. "Dad, what's wrong?" I asked, genuinely alarmed. I had never seen my father cry, not even when his own father died. "I have to tell you the truth about where your money really went," Harold said through his tears. "The credit card debt, the mortgage payments, all of it. Patricia has been lying about more than just your employment status." Harold reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope filled with papers, bank statements, credit card bills, and what appeared to be printouts from various websites. His hands shook as he spread them across his workbench. "Your mother has a gambling addiction, Rudolph, a severe one. She's been using your mortgage payments to pay off gambling debts from underground poker games around the city." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the papers Harold was showing me, trying to process this new level of betrayal and deception. Bank withdrawals for thousands of dollars at a time. Cash advances from credit cards. Website histories showing online gambling sites and forums for high-stakes poker games. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It started during the COVID lockdowns," Harold explained, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "She began playing online poker to pass the time. Small amounts at first, $20 or $30, but it escalated quickly. Within 6 months, she was losing hundreds of dollars a week." Harold showed me printouts from Patricia's online poker accounts. The losses were staggering. $15,000 in March alone, $22,000 in April. The numbers kept climbing until I could barely comprehend the scale of what I was seeing. "But online gambling wasn't enough," Harold continued. "She found underground games through people she met online. High-stakes poker in hotel rooms and private clubs. That's where the real money went." "How much money are we talking about, Dad?" Harold pulled out another sheet of paper, this one covered with his own handwriting. Calculations and totals that painted a picture of financial catastrophe beyond anything I had imagined. "The credit card debt I told you about is just what I knew about until last week. The real debt is closer to $65,000. She owes money to people who don't take credit cards or checks, if you understand what I mean." The implications of what my father was telling me began to sink in. My mother was not just financially irresponsible. She was involved with dangerous people who operated outside the legal system. People who would not hesitate to collect their debts through intimidation or violence. 2 weeks ago, a man came to my workplace, Harold said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He knew my schedule, knew where I parked my car, knew Emma's address. He asked very politely about when Patricia planned to pay what she owed his associates. Harold showed me screenshots of text messages on Patricia's phone messages he had discovered when she left it unlocked on the kitchen counter. The threats were not subtle. References to final notices and alternative collection methods and family consequences. That's why I haven't been able to confront her about the spending, Harold admitted. I've been terrified of what might happen to us if she can't pay these people back. The garage door opened suddenly, and Patricia appeared in the doorway. She must have seen us from the house window and decided to investigate what we were discussing privately. Her face was flushed with anger, and what I now recognized as desperation. "Harold, what are you doing out here?" she demanded. "What are you telling him?" "I'm telling him the truth," Harold said quietly, straightening up to face his wife. "I'm telling him where his money really went." Patricia's expression shifted from anger to pure panic as she realized what Harold was revealing. She stepped into the garage and closed the door behind her, apparently not wanting the rest of the family to overhear what was about to be said. "You promised me you wouldn't tell anyone about that," she hissed at Harold. "You gave me your word that we would handle this privately." "Handle what privately?" I asked. "Handle the fact that you've been gambling away my mortgage payments. Handle the fact that you owe dangerous people more money than most people make in a year." Patricia's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled completely. The confident, controlling woman who had been making demands and issuing ultimatums just an hour earlier transformed before my eyes into someone desperate and defeated. "I was going to win it back," she said, her voice breaking. "I had a system I was getting better at reading people. I just needed more time and more money to work with." "Patricia, that's not how gambling works," Harold said gently. "You know that. Deep down, you know that." Dorothy appeared in the garage doorway, having apparently followed Patricia from the house. Behind her, I could see Emma hovering uncertainly near the back door, clearly aware that something significant was happening, but not sure whether to approach. "I heard raised voices," Dorothy said, looking around at our faces. "Is everything all right out here?" "No, grandmother," I said. "Everything is definitely not all right." I began explaining to Dorothy what Harold had just revealed. The gambling addiction, the underground poker games, the dangerous people who were now making threats against our family. With each detail, Dorothy's expression grew more grave and more sad. "Patricia," Dorothy said when I finished, "is this true? Are you telling me that you've put your entire family in danger because of gambling debts?" Patricia had been holding herself together through sheer force of will, but Dorothy's gentle, disappointed tone finally broke her completely. She collapsed into Harold's arms, sobbing with the raw grief of someone whose carefully constructed world had finally fallen apart. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," Patricia cried. "It started so small, just a way to feel some excitement during lockdown. But every time I lost, I thought I could win it back with one more game. And when I started winning occasionally, it felt like proof that I could beat the system if I just got better at it." Harold held his wife while she sobbed, his own tears falling silently. "She's been living in terror for weeks," he told us. "Afraid to leave the house alone, afraid to answer the phone. But she couldn't stop gambling because she convinced herself it was the only way out." Dorothy moved closer to Patricia, her grandmother's instincts overriding her disappointment. "Sweetheart, this is an addiction. It's a disease. There are people who can help you, programs specifically designed for this problem." "I tried to stop," Patricia said through her tears. "I deleted the apps, closed the online accounts. But then I would have a bad day, or feel stressed about money, and I would convince myself that just one more game would solve everything." Emma appeared in the garage doorway, having finally worked up the courage to join us. Her young face was streaked with tears as she began to understand the full scope of what our family was dealing with. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" Emma asked. "Why did you let us think Rudolph was the problem when you were the one who needed help?" Patricia looked up at her daughter, then at me. Her eyes filled with shame and regret that seemed genuine for the first time all day. Because admitting I had a problem would mean admitting I had failed as a mother and a wife. It was easier to make Rudolph the villain than to face the truth about what I had become. The raw honesty of her admission hit me harder than all the lies and manipulation had. This was my mother finally telling the truth about her struggles and her mistakes. The woman who had raised me, who had cheered at my baseball games and helped with my homework, who had somehow lost her way so completely that she had risked everything our family had worked for. "Patricia," I said gently, "what you've told me changes everything. This isn't about financial irresponsibility or family dynamics. This is about addiction and safety. We need to get you help, and we need to figure out how to protect everyone from these people you owe money to." Harold nodded emphatically. "That's all I've wanted, son. I just want to get her the help she needs and find a way to keep our family safe. But I didn't know how to do it without putting everyone at risk." Dorothy, with the wisdom that comes from nearly 8 decades of life experience, began taking charge of the situation. "The first thing we need to do is get Patricia into treatment. There are excellent programs specifically designed for gambling addiction. The second thing is to figure out exactly how much money we're dealing with and whether we can resolve this debt situation safely." I looked around the garage at my family. These people who had hurt me so deeply just hours earlier, but who I realized were also victims of circumstances that had spiraled beyond anyone's control. The gambling addiction explained so much about Patricia's behavior over the past months. The lies, the defensive anger, the desperate attempts to maintain control, all of it made sense in the context of someone struggling with addiction and living in fear of dangerous consequences. "I'm not going to sell the house," I said quietly, "but we're going to do this differently from now on. Professional help, complete financial transparency, and a structured plan for recovery. No more secrets, no more lies." The next few days moved quickly as our family began the process of addressing the crisis that had been hidden beneath months of lies and manipulation. I canceled the real estate appointment and instead spent my time researching gambling addiction treatment programs and consulting with attorneys about how to safely manage Patricia's debt situation. Dorothy proved to be the backbone our family needed during this difficult period. She moved into the guest bedroom temporarily to provide around-the-clock support for Patricia, who was experiencing severe anxiety and depression as she faced the reality of her addiction. Dorothy had dealt with addiction in her own family decades earlier and knew the importance of professional intervention combined with unwavering family support. On Monday morning, Patricia entered a 30-day inpatient gambling addiction treatment program at a facility in Wisconsin that specialized in helping people who had accumulated significant debt through their gambling behaviors. The program included financial counseling therapy for underlying mental health issues and structured support for family members who had been affected by their loved one's addiction. Harold began attending therapy sessions for family members of gambling addicts, where he learned about enabling behaviors and how to support Patricia's recovery without inadvertently making it easier for her to relapse. For the first time in months, he was sleeping through the night without worrying about mysterious phone calls or unexpected visitors. I established a financial trust account that would manage all household expenses going forward. Patricia would have access to a modest personal allowance for basic needs, but all major expenses would be handled through the trust to remove the temptation and opportunity for further gambling. Harold would receive financial literacy counseling to help him understand and monitor the household budget. The debt situation required more delicate handling. Through my attorney, we contacted Patricia's creditors and arranged payment plans that would satisfy the debts over 3 years without putting the family at further risk. Some of the underground gambling operators proved surprisingly willing to accept structured payment arrangements when presented with legal documentation and professional mediation. Emma surprised everyone by taking a leadership role in coordinating family therapy sessions and researching support groups for families affected by gambling addiction. She admitted that she had noticed changes in Patricia's behavior over the past year, but had attributed them to stress rather than addiction. Her guilt over not recognizing the signs motivated her to become our family's advocate for ongoing recovery support. The extended family members who had witnessed the Thanksgiving confrontation reached out individually to apologize for believing Patricia's lies about my financial situation. Robert offered to serve as an independent financial advisor to help our family rebuild trust and establish healthy money management practices. Derek and Sarah provided emotional support and helped research treatment options during those first difficult weeks. Most importantly, Patricia began the hard work of recovery. The treatment program helped her understand that gambling addiction is a legitimate medical condition that affects brain chemistry in ways similar to substance addictions. She learned coping strategies for managing stress and anxiety without turning to gambling, and she began making amends for the harm her addiction had caused to our family relationships. 3 months after that terrible Thanksgiving day, Patricia completed her inpatient treatment and transitioned to ongoing outpatient counseling combined with regular Gamblers Anonymous meetings. She had been gambling-free for 90 days and was learning to rebuild her life around healthy activities and genuine connections with family and friends. Harold emerged from his own counseling with a better understanding of how his conflict avoidance had enabled Patricia's addiction to escalate unchecked. He learned to have difficult conversations and set appropriate boundaries while still providing loving support for Patricia's recovery process. By spring, our family had established new traditions built around honesty and mutual accountability. Sunday dinners became weekly check-ins where everyone shared their challenges and successes from the previous week. We celebrated Patricia's recovery milestones and acknowledged the ongoing work required to maintain healthy family relationships. The house remained in my name, but I established a clear path for my parents to regain ownership once they demonstrated 3 consecutive years of financial stability and addiction recovery. This arrangement provided security for everyone while creating appropriate incentives for continued progress. 6 months after treatment, Patricia found part-time work at a nonprofit organization that provided financial counseling to people struggling with debt and addiction issues. Using her own experience to help others proved to be powerfully healing and gave her a sense of purpose that gambling had never provided. Harold returned to work with renewed energy and confidence, finally free from the constant anxiety about Patricia's secret activities and their mounting financial obligations. His diabetes management improved significantly once the stress-related complications were removed from his daily life. Emma moved back home temporarily to help support Patricia's transition back to daily life, while maintaining her own career and personal boundaries. She had learned valuable lessons about enabling behaviors and family systems that would serve her well in her own future relationships. Dorothy returned to her own home, but remained an active part of our family's recovery process, providing wisdom and perspective whenever challenging situations arose. She often reminded us that addiction is a family disease that requires family healing, and that our crisis had ultimately brought us closer together than we had been in years. 1 year later, we gathered for Thanksgiving again, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Patricia had been gambling-free for 15 months and was thriving in her work helping other families navigate financial crises. Harold had regained his confidence and sense of purpose. Emma had developed into a strong, independent young woman with healthy boundaries and excellent problem-solving skills. As I carved the turkey in my own dining room, surrounded by a family that had learned to value truth over comfort and recovery over perfection, I reflected on the painful lessons we had all learned. Sometimes love requires setting firm boundaries and demanding accountability from the people we care about. Sometimes fighting back means refusing to enable destructive behaviors, even when that refusal creates short-term pain for everyone involved. The greatest victory was not that I had won some kind of power struggle with my mother, but that our family had learned to choose honesty over image management, recovery over denial, and genuine connection over superficial harmony. Patricia's gambling addiction had nearly destroyed us, but addressing it openly and professionally had ultimately made us stronger than we had ever been before. The life lesson that emerged from our experience was profound. True family strength comes not from enabling destructive behavior to maintain false peace, but from having the courage to demand better from the people you love, even when that means enduring temporary conflict and discomfort. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to participate in their self-destruction, creating space for them to choose recovery and growth. Recovery is not a destination, but an ongoing process that requires constant vigilance, professional support, and family commitment. But when everyone involved is willing to do the difficult work of honest self-examination and behavior change, families can emerge from even the most devastating crises with deeper love and stronger bonds than they ever thought possible. Our story proves that sometimes what feels like the end of everything is actually the beginning of something much better. Patricia's gambling addiction could have destroyed our family permanently, but because we chose professional help over denial and accountability over enabling it, became the catalyst for the healthiest family relationships any of us had ever experienced. As I watched my family sharing stories and laughter around our Thanksgiving table, I realized that the painful confrontation 1 year earlier had been necessary to save us all. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything in order to save what truly matters. Sometimes fighting back means fighting for people to become their better selves, rather than simply fighting to protect yourself from their destructive behaviors. The house that had become a symbol of conflict and manipulation was now a home filled with genuine love, honest communication, and shared commitment to everyone's ongoing well-being. We had learned that recovery is possible, that families can heal from even the deepest betrayals, and that sometimes the most devastating crises become the foundation for the most beautiful transformations. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between enabling someone you love and setting boundaries that felt harsh, but were ultimately necessary for their growth and recovery? I would love to hear about your experiences with family addiction, financial boundaries, or situations where tough love proved to be the most caring response. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, I would be grateful if you would like this video, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about family challenges and recovery, and share this with someone who might benefit from hearing about how families can heal from addiction and betrayal. Thank you for listening to our family's story and for being part of a community that believes in the possibility of redemption, recovery, and genuine transformation. I wish you and your families the courage to choose truth over comfort, the strength to set healthy boundaries, and the wisdom to know when fighting for someone means refusing to fight their battles for them.